But this morning's session is focused on data quality. We have three speakers who will all be talking about important issues of data quality in online platforms that have been on a lot of people's minds. So each of our speakers has a lot of work in this area, and I won't go through all kind of their qualifications and relevant experience. I'll just list kind of who they are and what they'll be talking about. So first we have Dr. Barbara Larson, who's a professor at Northeastern University. She'll be delivering a talk that has to do with bad faith responses and online platforms. Then we have Yefim Roth from Haifa University. He'll be delivering a talk about the role of attention and data quality in online platforms. And then the co-CEO and Chief Research Officer of CloudResearch, Leigh Blitman, will be talking about some ways that you can improve data quality across a variety of online research platforms. So 3 talks really about an important issue.
So this is a small study, actually a kind of a pilot study that we presented. So I guess I should say I'm a management professor at the business school at Northeastern University, and the reason that I got into data quality was actually I think a common experience, unfortunately, in that my co-authors and I, at the beginning of COVID, started a study. We're all experienced researchers, including with survey research, and yet made some what turned out to be critical mistakes and ended up with a really bad data set. And so in the spirit of taking lemons and turning them into lemonade, we decided let's learn what we can about the state of the field when it comes to dealing with bad faith survey responses. And that then yielded a panel that Labe actually joined back in August. And then Labe asked me to come and talk a little bit about this here. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so quick background. What do we mean for our purposes by bad faith responses? Well, any number of things, right? So careless or poor quality answers. This, may be incentive driven, or just may be a desire to get it done, right? This is sort of your undergraduate student just wanting to get it done, to finish the survey. It can be insufficient effort, but it's not necessarily just your classic insufficient effort either. And we continue to sort of investigate to figure out if there are other drivers that we're missing. And maybe Yefim, I'm guessing, is going to have some thoughts on that. And then we've got fraudulent participants, which was actually something that we experienced in our data gathering at a level that we had never personally seen before. And this was, sort of actively lying to qualify for a study, and multiple answers by one person to the same survey. And I think one thing that we've learned in our research and our sort of study of the literature is that this can be manual entry. So you have these sort of farms, of people paid very little money to take surveys. But then there are automated tools as well, such as bots and scripts that are, becoming more common. So, but at the end of the day, regardless of the origin, the outcome is bad data. I will make it's interesting because this, which I'm sure everybody on the call has probably heard about, is Prolific's kind of, I guess the event that they experienced in August of having become the subject of a viral TikTok video, and that then resulted in their respondent pools being heavily skewed towards women in their 20s for I don't know, a month or so. And, and that's not what we're talking about here. So it's different from skewed respondent pools. Obviously, those are damaging as well, but it's not, not in the same way. Okay, so what we did as part of our, sort of study of this, we really wanted to understand kind of the state of the field in management research. And management research obviously comes out of social science. So this is, maybe a microcosm of social science research. We were limited in that it turns out that when you're surveying social scientists, it's very hard to get access to mailing lists of groups of social scientists to do survey research, for probably the obvious reason is that, if you let everybody have these mailing lists, we all love to give surveys, so we'd be, getting 100 surveys a week. So instead, we basically said, let's do a pilot study and see if we can ultimately motivate a larger study. And so we recruited our, people via our professional networks, listservs, social media. We did limit this to faculty and postdocs. We didn't feel like doctoral students would necessarily, we thought they would be, more motivated to answer the survey and have more time, and yet really not have the experience to give us the insight that we were looking for. So we did validate extensively, which did end up in excluding some doctoral students who tried to get in. And there were a couple of other non-academic, and then there was actually a really bad faith couple of responses just from, bad email addresses, which kind of shocked us. But anyway, we ended up with 58 usable responses. They were pretty balanced between male and female. They were mostly based in the US. They were reasonably balanced between the different levels of professor, although they were a little light on associate professor. But we felt like it was a pretty decent, sample for our purposes. The preliminary findings is that, there is a perception, certainly the bad faith responses are growing over time, and this may be a function of the lower cost of running surveys, leading to a proliferation of surveys, which is then leading to, kind of a reduction in attention to the surveys. That's just sort of our, kind of the sense that we're getting. That's anecdotal. But we will say that, over 70% said that they saw a slight or significant increase in bad faith responses over time, both in general and in their own research. So we asked both separately. We asked them about their perceptions of general management research, and then we asked them a set of questions about their own research experiences. The concerns that came up, it was interesting to us to find that careless responses are still the number one area of concern. And I think that this was also reinforced within the panel discussion that we had back in August. There are then, concerns about fraudulent responses, multiple responses, and bots in that order. There was less concern about bots, but at the same time, we did have, an eighth of respondents that didn't even know what they were. Which was also kind of interesting to us. And so it certainly raises the question of whether it's, whether people are actually completely diagnosing, their data issues accurately. So we asked people about what concerns they had about different types of sample sources. And, unsurprisingly, there was more concern about self-managed sources such as MTurk, not with CloudResearch, just straight MTurk, over managed services. And, so Qualtrics, CloudResearch, Prolific would be included in those. The least concern was, about studying employees in organizations and also listservs, although very few of our respondents actually said that they used listservs. So then, we asked about prevention, which is measures taken to keep bad actors from accessing the survey in the first place, and then detection, which of course are measures taken to find bad data once it's already in the data set. It was interesting to us that given the range of possibilities, for both prevention and detection, the use of specific measures was still fairly narrow. And and we found that for prevention, really pre-screening was the only significant action taken to prevent bad actors from getting in. Now, I mean, this is consistent with people mostly being concerned about attentional, sort of attentional deficits during the survey. So if you're not worried about actual bad actors, then you're not going to take a lot of time trying to prevent them getting in. For detection, I think, attention checks remain it's like the song that's been popular for 50 years. It remains the number one tactic undertaken. And then the other two that really stood out were checking survey completion times, both overall survey completion time, but then questions sort of at the individual question level, and then also response patterns to see if there are any sort of repeating responses, or A, B, C, D, E types of responses. So those were the three that came out. Now, I mean, this is striking to us, or interesting, I guess I would say, to us, in the sense that we did a literature review and found a handful of additional prevention tactics, which I think these folks on this call are probably very familiar with. And within detection, we found an extensive array of tactics that are already sort of published and validated in peer-reviewed journals. And so it is kind of interesting to us to think about, why is it, is it that the field, that there's a lot of stuff out there that the field needs to kind of catch up? Or is it that some of these tactics are relatively low ROI, return on investment? And so, so we're certainly interested in learning more about that in our next stage. Okay, so again, final thoughts and takeaways, certainly for management researchers, is that it's worth collecting more data than needed in anticipation of bad data, especially when you come to sort of low attention types of responses. Each technique has the potential to identify a different set of respondents. And so it's, there's value to using, we think, multiple techniques. And I feel like, if anything, like pilot studies do, they sort of point to what needs to be studied. And, we think sample sources, effectiveness of techniques, and the impact of incentives as well. We had in the survey, I didn't really touch on this, we had in the survey a huge range of philosophies and opinions, because we did have some open text responses. And we had just a surprising range of responses, ranging from, I get all good data and I never pay incentives. It's all about the meaningfulness of the survey, to, I pay the equivalent of $25 an hour. So, and I can't imagine doing anything less. So I think that's something that also could, has been studied, but probably could use, some more attention. Okay, so that's my, I think I made it in 15 minutes. So happy to take questions, or we can move on, and I'll be around for the rest of the panel.
Yeah, so thank you, Barbara. I think our plan is to go ahead and allow some questions after each talk. So we have quite a few minutes here, maybe 5 to 10 minutes for questions here. So, if people have them, go ahead.
I do see a couple in the chat, so I'll go ahead and address that. So Sierra says, I may have missed it, but what was the exact question that was asked to determine if they knew who they were? Sierra, I don't know if you could clarify that for me. By they and they, do you mean if our survey respondents knew who the bad actors were? Let's see. You said the bots didn't know. No, sorry, I'll clarify. The respondents to our survey, there was about an eighth of the respondents to our survey who didn't know what bots were. Like, they just didn't, they had never even heard of the idea of bots being a thing, right? So, okay, so I think hopefully I answered that. Let's see, so no, to answer Matt's paper, There is not at this point a white paper. We've actually had to put this study on hold, frankly, because we're academics and our first fall back in the classroom has hit hard. So we haven't touched this in a couple of months. And our plan is to turn this into a paper, and we may make it to Academy next year with a paper, but not yet. So we'll be working on that in coming months. Thank you for that. And then I see Tobias. Oh, interesting. So I hope everybody sees Tobias's this sort of I guess it's a tale of woe in the chat here. Recently, we ran a survey in a geographic area in the U.S. And a group in China found our survey, created a how-to video on YouTube that included how to answer our questions randomly and provided link to a VPN with rotating IP addresses that allowed people to essentially look like they were based on the fake geography. So that's, I mean, that I suspect that we had something similar to that. And so, yeah, it's a frustrating situation once you realize you're in it. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'll let the chat with Tobias continue in the chat field. And if there's anything else, like I said, I'll be around for the rest of the session, but I'm looking forward to hearing the other presentations.
I have actually one question, Barbara.
Yes.
Thanks for the excellent talk. Maybe I missed it, but you said at the beginning that some of the people were disqualified from your survey, from these professors, right? Am I correct?
So yeah, we had a handful of disqualifications that most were doctoral students that I think probably, even though we had put it multiple times in bold text that we were excluding doctoral students, I would like to think they just missed that, as opposed to they tried to get through anyway. They did identify themselves in the qualification round as doctoral students, but we were also checking URLs. So that, we disqualified them. And then we had one or two, I can't remember if it was one or two actual, what looked like bad faith responses of just, sort of random email addresses. It was almost as though, I felt like it was almost as though someone were testing to see if we were really checking URLs. And and I just, we disqualified them, and that was that. But that was one or two.
So I assume it was incentive based. Otherwise, I don't see what was the reason for me to cheat.
So yeah, we had a drawing. We've offered a drawing of 2 gift cards. So that was, so there was a little bit of an incentive, not an extensive, not a generous incentive. It was more just to get people to pay attention. I actually kind of wonder if it was more like an academic trying to test us to see if, we were actually like walking the talk. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, but I don't know.
Thanks.
Okay, great. I think that's it. I'll turn it back to Aaron.
All right. Well, thank you. And next, I believe we're going to have Efim present about the role of attention in checking decisions and data quality. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you. Hi, all. Just one last comment on Barbara's talk, and then I move to my presentation. This is just a comment. Another possible explanation is that my research actually shows that we do not often do not pay attention, like we often do not read instructions. So it might be possible that some of the participants just entered the survey without realizing that the PhD students are not welcome.
I completely agree. I think, as I said, I think with the doctoral students, it was most likely that they just hadn't read the instructions and saw the dollars and, and just went for it. So yeah, I didn't sense any true bad faith in the moral sense with the doctoral students. It was those one or two sort of weird outliers that were the only two that I noticed.
So hi all, my name is Efim Roth and I'm from the University of Haifa. And this talk is about the role of attention in online checking experiments. And I think it's quite related to Barbara's talk, so I hope it will spur a discussion at the end. So, oops. Running experiments online have numerous advantages, as we know. It is fast, numerous advantages comparing to running experiments in the lab. It's fast, it's presumably much cheaper. You are exposed to a very large subject pool, and you have a large diversity of the subjects pool. And in times of pandemics, obviously these advantages are even more critical than ever. Still, there are concerns about the quality of the subject's data, as we heard in the talk before. Still, but some studies report no meaningful difference between the subject pool. I mean, between the online and offline platforms. And other studies, as in Barbara's talk, report that there might be differences in behavior between online and physical labs, in the sense that in the online subjects pool, we see more noise, more random choices, and in the physical lab, there are more deliberate choices. And one proposed solution to this, to improving the quality of the online data, is to use attention checks. So it's a quote from one paper. We show it's possible to accurately capture survey attentiveness using only 2 standalone multiple choice screen questions and 2 simple true-false questions within a grid. So basically, again, referring to Barbara's talk, Barbara also suggested to use multiple attention checks and screening techniques. Though this advice is primarily aimed at scholars using a 10 to 20 minutes online survey, these guidelines can be adapted to other surveys as well. This is again a quote from this paper by Berinsky et al. Okay, so we take a slightly different approach, and we investigate what will happen if we use only one very simple attention test in the checking experiments. And we have 2 main questions of interest in this paper. One, are the attentive and the inattentive participants differ from laboratory participants in checking experiments? And second, is there a difference between the attentive and the inattentive participants? I will reiterate these 2 somewhat related questions. So the question number 1, following the reproducibility and replicability crisis, we are interested whatever we can replicate the results we found in physical lab in online laboratory. And question number 2, we are looking at the differences between the attentive and the inattentive participants in the online platform. So here's how the attention test looked like. There were quite simple instructions, and maybe you cannot see it, but here, through the instructions, we write that in the comments text field below, you have to enter the word thanks. This is to ensure that you read and understand all the instructions. And here is the comments field. And basically, this is all the attention tests that we use. This is the only attention test that we use in this battery of line of research. Now, importantly, so the attentive participants were those who typed thanks in this field, and the inattentive participants were those who failed to type thanks in this comments field, or those who typed any other things, or even have not typed anything, like just skipped it and continued with the experiment. Now, importantly, there was no any consequence whatsoever for the participants. So even if I failed the attention test, I had no idea about it. unless I read about it in the forum, but there was no any consequences for the participants. Okay, so now I turn to the our experimental paradigm, and here it's the important difference between what Barbara talked about and what I'm talking about, because it's not a survey, but a repeated choice experiment. I will show you in a second. So basically, the participants saw a screen like that with a certain number of buttons, and they had to make repeated decisions. And it was a 100 trials repeated choice with full feedback. I will show you in a second. And the very limited instructions. I show you the instructions in the previous screen. Basically, the instructions told them to do what works best for them. And this is incentive compatible in the sense that the more points they earn during the experiment, the higher their chance to earn additional money. So they have the incentive to choose the better outcomes, to try to choose. Unknowingly to the participants, each of these buttons provided a payoff between 0 and 10. And the checking button provided the maximal payoff in each trial minus the checking cost. So here is how it looked. You saw this screen, you choose one of the buttons. Let's assume you choose this button, and you see that you earned 6 points, and you see the other payoffs. Why the check button also provides 6 points? Because in this experiment, the checking cost was 3. The maximal payoff was 9. So 9 minus 3 is 6. Okay, so here the only thing that I can do is to click next and move on to the next trial. So let's assume now I clicked on the check button. Okay, again, I see the feedback from all the possible outcomes. Why the check button provides 7 points? The reason is that the maximal payoff in this trial was 10. As I said, the checking cost was 3. So 10 minus 3 equals 7, and checking provided 7. Okay, again, I have to click next, move on to the next trial, and so on. This is a repeated experiment for 100 trials. And basically what interests us is the checking rate. What percentage of the time that participants clicked on the check button relative to what percentage of the time they clicked on the other buttons. Yeah. So recall that we had only one simple attention test, and our two main research question is whatever the attentive and inattentive participants in the online experiment will differ from physical lab participants. And secondly, whatever there will be a difference between the attentive and the inattentive participants in the online experiment, in the checking paradigm, which I presented you a second ago. And here is the attention test. This is just for you to recall. Okay, so study 1 used a beneficial checking. So the cost of checking was 3 points, and the expected value, the mean payoff of each of the buttons of not checking was 5, and the expected value of checking was higher. It was on average 5.6. So it's beneficial to choose the checking button, but notice that it is never the best. Like always, there is some buttons that provide higher outcome. Okay. So why this replication, going to question number 1, might fail? So there are many reasons why it might fail, because one of them is that it's a completely different samples. In the original lab study, it was students population. Here, we do not know exactly, or presume it can be a lot more diverse sample, probably less educated. We used in the online laboratory smaller monetary incentives. We had obviously less control, and the replication was done during the pandemic. And the checking is the lower risk option. And some previous research suggests that during times of pandemics, or people are willing to take less risks. So all of these reasons might be reasons why the replication might fail. Okay, so here are the results of the study 1 with the beneficial checking. And here you see the original lab study, which was run about 2 years ago. So you can see that on average, the checking rate in the physical laboratory study was about 25%. Okay, so what happened in the online laboratory? So here you can see the behavior of the attentive participants. This is the replication. So as you can see, the results are quite the same. But if you look on the inattentive participants, their behavior differs significantly. So they check only about 10% of the time, I reiterate, while the attentive participants check about 25% of the time, and very similarly to our originally published paper to the lab participants. Okay, so the attentive, as I said, attentive participants behave identically to lab participants. And they significantly differed from the inattentive participants. Okay, let me show you another study with highly beneficial checking. Here we see 25 buttons. Again, it's very similar in the sense that clicking on each of the buttons provide a 0 to 10 payoff, and the checking button provides the best minus a cost of 3. And checking is highly beneficial in this setting. It provides expected average payoff of 6.7. Here it has the looks. It looks, and here is the result. So here you see the original physical lab experiment. Here you see the behavior of the attentive participants in the online experiment. So again, it's quite similar, especially on average. And the inattentive participants, again, check much less. So they differ significantly from the attentive participants. So again, a recurring pattern, the attentive replicated the lab study, the inattentive differed significantly. So far in these 2 experiments that I showed you, checking was always beneficial. But what will happen when checking is detrimental? So study 3 explores in a similar paradigm, but a situation where checking impairs payoff. So the cost of checking is high. All the other things are the same. Again, each button provides a payoff between 0 and 10, but the cost of checking is 5. So it provides the maximal payoff of all these buttons minus the cost of 5, and it impairs the expected payoff. Sorry. Here is how the screen looks like. So again, the maximal payoff here was 10. So because of the checking cost of 5, it provides a payoff of 5. So here the detrimental checking rate of the inattentive participants. We don't have the lab participants in this study. And here is the attentive participants. So as you can see in this study, the behavior of inattentive participants is indistinguishable from the behavior of the attentive participants, and both of them check quite a small amount of time. Still, the attentive check a bit more than the inattentive. Okay. Okay. So here is the last study that I will show you. This study is with rare events. So most of the time in this case, checking is beneficial, but once in a while, it provides a very bad outcome. It leads to a loss of a lot of points. So checking is very bad on average, but most of the time, it is quite beneficial. What we can see here's 2 examples. So most of the time, it provides the maximal payoff +1, but once in a while, it provides a -50. So here again, we see the results of the inattentive participants. And here are the results for the attentive participants. So again, the checking rate of both the attentive and inattentive participants are higher, are about 25%. And again, indistinguishable between the inattentive and attentive participants. So what's going on here? Initially, if we looked only on study 1 and 2, we might think that, okay, the attentive participants always check more than the inattentive participants. But if we look at studies 3 and 4, we see that this is not the case. In some studies, their behavior is indistinguishable. So what we think is going on here is that the attentive participants have initial propensity towards checking. They have higher checking rates and higher probability to notice the different outcomes. Basically, they're the higher quality participants who pay more attention to the experiment. So if there are bad outcomes, they have higher probability to notice them, while the inattentive participants probably behave more randomly. So they exhibit more noise. But still, so in some experiments, depending on the experiment, if you don't use the attention check, you will not see the difference in behavior between the attentive and inattentive. In other, the difference is very pronounced. Okay, so what's going on here? Basically, we replicated the results of the lab study, but only for the attentive participants. The attentive participants in online experiments seems to behave similarly to lab participants, which is a good news. And it is important for me to emphasize in this session that, again, we used a very simple attention check, and it was only one attention check at the beginning of the experiment, and that's all. So you don't have, at least in the repeated experiments, it seems that you don't have to have a lot of attention tests to separate the attentive from the inattentive participants. The inattentive participants, as I said, behaved more randomly. And again, one simple attention check was enough to separate the participants. And last cautionary note, ignoring them, ignoring the attention check would lead to erroneous conclusions that the results have not replicated if we have not used the attention check, or that the online sample differ from the lab participants, which is not the case. Oops, sorry. Okay, I think that's it. And if you have any questions or suggestions, I will be happy to hear them, or that you email them to me. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we have some time for questions, and I think people can enter them into the chat, or I think you should be able to unmute yourself if you'd like to have like a back and forth conversation. So either one is fine, whatever people are comfortable with, but we do have some time for some question and answer here.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just actually curious. It seemed to me like the checking increased over time when that was beneficial. Is that significant? And if, in other words, it seemed like people from this graph, right? It seemed like people became aware potentially of what was going on, right? And of the benefit, right, of the checking strategy. And I'm just wondering if you actually ever looked at whether this is an explicit effect where people are consciously becoming aware of this, or some kind of an implicit tendency to pick up on what's going on without quite being able to verbalize why.
Thanks, Leib. So answering question number one, indeed there is learning. So for example, in this study, in study 2, when the checking was beneficial, there is learning. So within time, the checking rate increased. Notice that there is more learning for the attentive participants than the inattentive participants. There is also learning in the other experiment when the checking was detrimental. So here, for example, you see a reduction in the detrimental checking rate, both for the attentive and the inattentive participants. I have to check, it depends on the studies. Actually, I presented only 4 studies, but we had 10 or 12 studies with recurring pattern. I think for most of them, this learning is, in some of them, this learning is significant, and in the others, not. I don't remember from the top of my head exactly for this study to tell you, but I can definitely check it. Going back to your second question, the answer is no. We have not checked explicitly whatever they, what they make sense. I think we have not checked explicitly whatever they make sense of the, whatever, this is a conscious process. But what I can tell you that in some other studies, we do ask these questions, and usually they cannot verbally explain what's going on. Yes, Michael.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if these results are only applicable to this type of attention check, which seems to be reading instructions. So I sometimes participate myself, and I hardly ever read the instructions because I just want to get to the survey. So it's possible that some people, just like me, skip them and then immediately focus on what they believe the task to be, just to save a little time through the whole, we've seen it all before type of stuff. What do you think about that? And do you think your results would replicate if you'd used a different attention check, one of the more traditional ones?
This is excellent question, which I forgot to mention. Excellent. I completely agree with you. Like, if you think about a rational participant, or if you think about the real life, you buy an appliance, you buy a new TV. Do you read all the instructions of how to use this TV? No, you just click the button and use it. We completely agree with you that similar thing is happening here. So the rational behavior might be just to, why do I bother to read all this consent form, which will not provide me any useful information? Just go ahead and participate in the experiment. So what we think is happening here, people have a lot of opportunities to learn from their own experience. So maybe the rational choice will be not to read these instructions. Still, as you can see by the results, it seems that those who do pay more attention are the somehow more qualified participants who pay more attention generally to the study itself. But it might be perfectly that some of the inattentive participants are perfectly qualified participants who do pay attention to the experiment itself and just skip the instruction. So generally, we completely agree with you. Now, whatever our simple attention check applies to other studies, and whatever using a different simple attention check will lead to similar results, I think yes. So if we use this a different, so there is nothing magical about the word thanks. This is what I mean. If you use a different simple attention test, we think it will lead to similar results. This is my intuition.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so we have probably about 2 minutes or so left here. There's a question in the chat from Tobias. He asks, do you have any thoughts on how literacy impacts this kind of control question?
Thanks. So again, notice that even if I completely don't understand the instructions, I basically have plenty of experience with the experiment. And the experiment is very simple in the sense that most of us have the intuitions that 10 is better than 6, right? So I see buttons on the screen and I choose the one that is best for me. So I think literacy should play the least role in this kind of experience, because if, for example, I run a survey and I don't understand what's happening on there, I'm in a big problem. I cannot understand the meaning of the words. But here, this experiment is very simple and I have a lot of experience. So here, the literacy should play the least role in my opinion. But still, it seems that maybe it might be the reasons that some of the participants don't understand the attention check, but we don't think that this is the issue. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we'll now go ahead and turn it over to Labe, who will be talking about some different ways to measure and improve data quality across a variety of online platforms. So Labe.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. I'm going to pick up where Barbara and Yefim left off. There's a lot of overlap between what they discussed and some of the things that I'll be talking about, particularly with Yefim's approach of using relatively simple and short attention checks to really identify problematic respondents. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. And what I'm really going to talk about are some of the tools that our team at CloudResearch has developed over the last several years to improve data quality on MTurk and on other platforms beyond Mechanical Turk. In starting this conversation, I think it would be helpful to take a brief look at some historical background. So in the late 1990s and early 2000s, excitement was just beginning to build up about the potential of online data collection. But it was not really until around 2011 that social scientists began to truly scale up their use of the internet as a source of research participants. And this shift to online data collection was largely facilitated by Mechanical Turk, which was the first site that made collecting online data relatively easy and affordable. And MTurk quickly began to be used in multiple fields, with most studies showing that data quality was pretty much as good or better than data obtained in the lab. And studies using MTurk data within just a few years have been published in over 1,000 different types of academic journals. But in the summer of 2018, there was a qualitative shift that occurred on Mechanical Turk. And many academics probably remember the bot scare, so-called, during which there was a dramatic and sudden drop in the quality of data on MTurk. And researchers began to notice and to report that up to 40% of open-ended responses were complete gibberish. Close to half of responses to multiple choice items seemed to be random. In addition to all the conversations among researchers, there were also popular articles in places like Wired and the New Scientist claiming that Mechanical Turk was, quote, ruining social science. And collectively, these issues raised alarm about online data quality that persists to this very day. Now, it didn't actually take long to figure out what was causing most of the problem. In plain sight, there were Facebook ads that proliferated for people outside of the United States to purchase US-based MTurk accounts. And as can be seen here in this particular Facebook ad, US IDs were being sold for anywhere between $50 to $100 or 1,000 rupees in this case to workers based outside of the United States. Multiple research studies from independent labs, including some research that we did, provided evidence showing that these problems were not in fact the result of bots, but instead largely attributable to international workers on MTurk. People in India and places like Venezuela were found to be using tools like virtual private networks to hide the source of their web traffic and to access systems meant for participants within the US. And just like this was the case back then, this is still true today, as we see with some of the comments in the chat, with the kind of problems that people continue to experience across different online platforms. And what many people may not have known at the time is that these fraudulent actors were following the same strategy on other platforms. It's not just Mechanical Turk. And actually, data quality problems on other platforms have been worse than on MTurk and had preceded Mechanical Turk data quality issues by many years. Studies show that within online panels, around 30% of participants routinely fail simple attention checks, and that participants use technical tools to hide their geolocations, translate surveys into other languages, and use automatic form fillers. Overall, data quality problems ranging from respondent inattention to outright fraud are common on virtually all online platforms. And the possibility of collecting study rewards quickly attracts fraudulent actors. And this is simply a fact of life in online research, the same as it is in online banking and in really virtually anything that takes place online. So how do we protect against these types of problems and ensure the integrity of online data? So we think of this in terms of filters. All online platforms use some kind of a filter. And because filters are critical for data quality, I want to describe filters and how they're used across the industry. The process platforms use to improve sample quality can be thought of as a funnel. And we think of filters at each subsequent stage as levels of that funnel. And I'll start with the first two levels. So level one refers to the sign-up process. Participants who sign up on a platform typically undergo some sort of identity verification. And this may be as simple as verifying an email address or as involved as providing a social security number or uploading a driver's license. Now, the important part is that there's some sort of filter or check that people must pass through to be accepted to the platform. But this type of protection is simply not enough, as we now know. To achieve more protection or better protection, other filters must be implemented. And I want to tell you about two such filters that we developed at CloudResearch. The first is the filter we developed specifically for Mechanical Turk. And this is a platform-wide vetting process where every individual on the platform is administered a variety of behavioral assessments, including open-ended and closed-ended questions that are checked for quality. Participants are also monitored over time using feedback from researchers and platform metadata. We call the workers who pass this screening process as the approved group, and workers who do not pass are put on what we call the blocked group or the blocked list. MTurk is a marketplace where there are around 100,000 people who complete studies each year. And with a population of about 100,000 spread over the course of 12 months, MTurk is small enough that we can manage vetting basically the entire participant pool. And that's exactly what we started doing in the summer of 2020, right about a year ago. At this point, we have vetted well over 100,000 workers, and we have placed more than 70,000 people onto our approved list on CloudResearch. So about 30% of the people on MTurk have been effectively put on the block list. And with the approved list, CloudResearch works synergistically with MTurk to protect the MTurk ecosystem. So Mechanical Turk provides identity verification at level one when people sign up, and we know that this vetting is inadequate by itself, and CloudResearch then creates the approved group at level two. Now, when someone uses CloudResearch, the default setting is to use the approved group to sample from only the vetted participants, but researchers can also turn off the approved group and sample directly from Mechanical Turk. So how do we actually know whether the approved group works? So to examine the data quality of the approved participants, we conducted a study in collaboration with David Hauser from Queen's University. We collected data from three groups. The first condition collected data exclusively from approved workers. The second group collected data exclusively from the block list. And the third was open to the entire Mechanical Turk pool. And we examined a variety of outcome measures, including reading comprehension, reliability, honesty, attentiveness, cheating, satisficing, and replication of classic experimental effects. The paper is currently under review, but the preprint is available on PsycArchive. And overall, what we found was that the block participants performed very poorly on all outcome measures, and that data quality of the open MTurk sample was generally between the approved and the blocked group. And even though I can't show you all the data here from that paper, I want to show you just a few data points from the study to kind of illustrate what the data looked like. What you are seeing here on this slide is that we asked participants to describe what they see in each picture. And the responses had to be written out, so it's an open-ended response. The approved participants correctly indicated that the bottles contain wine 99% of the time, Humpty Dumpty 98% of the time, and Jeopardy 96% of the time. Overall, 95% of the approved group participants correctly described all three pictures. For the other conditions, on the other hand, only about 25% described all three pictures correctly. Another measure from the study that I want to tell you about is called the SODA anchoring task. And we were interested in this to see if we can replicate classic findings. And this again speaks to the whole replication crisis and just the ability to replicate classic effects. So in this particular task, participants are presented with a scenario and asked how much they would be willing to pay for a soda. And the between subjects manipulation is that some people think the soda comes from a rundown grocery store, and others think it's from a fancy resort. And the classic finding is that people typically are willing to pay more for a soda from a fancy resort than the grocery store. And this is what we would expect to replicate. So we examined data quality on this measure in two ways. At the most basic level, we looked at what percentage of responses were nonsense, because these were open-ended responses. And nonsense responses might include responding with gibberish or with numbers that are extremely far off the mean. Like, for example, paying $1,000 for a can of soda. What we found was that 36% of workers in the blocked group provided implausible responses, compared to 18% of workers in the open sample, and then compared to only 3% in the approved group. Now, once we removed all of the low quality respondents, the experimental manipulation still did not replicate among the remaining participants in the blocked group. And this really shows that the blocked group is responding pretty much randomly and is likely not paying attention to what they're doing. But the manipulation did replicate in the open and the approved group once problematic respondents were removed. And so these data points are kind of representative of what we found across a variety of measures. And the pattern of results that we're finding basically shows that the approved, that the data that's collected from the approved group tends to be very good and is dramatically better than data quality compared to the block list or the open mechanical Turk sample. And over the last year, the approved group has been used to run over 10,000 studies on CloudResearch. And what we find is that essentially putting around 1/3 of mechanical Turk workers on the block list to prevent them from participating in studies pretty much resolves the data quality problems on mechanical Turk. And studies using the approved group should expect to see less than 5% problematic data in their data sets. Now, the approved list, or what we call level 2 vetting, works very well for mechanical Turk. But what about other platforms? There are actually hundreds of online platforms that can be used to recruit participants for research. And these platforms are able to reach tens of millions of people and to provide powerful capabilities beyond the relatively small platform like mechanical Turk. And because of their large sample size, though, there are far too many participants to make it in-depth vetting feasible on these larger platforms. So what we do is to use another type of approach or another type of filter that we refer to as level 3 filtering. And this type of process works by vetting participants prior to them entering the survey and in preventing them from entering the survey in the first place. But before talking about level 3 filters in more detail, I want to briefly address a larger issue, which is why should participants consider using these online panel platforms in the first place? Why aren't platforms like Mechanical Turk enough? So online platforms actually have, online panels rather, have many advantages, and they also have their limitations. First, let's talk about some of the unique strengths and advantages of large online panels. So platforms like Qualtrics panels, Dynata, CloudResearch's Prime panels, and Lucid are orders of magnitude larger than smaller platforms like Mechanical Turk. They provide access to tens of millions of people around the world, compared to around 100,000 on mTurk. And due to their large size and large sampling frame, these larger panels provide more representative data and offer access to niche groups and other hard-to-reach samples that cannot be accessed with smaller platforms. And here on this table are just a few examples that of samples that can be recruited through panels, but not through Mechanical Turk. So there's the ability to sample 25,000 people very quickly, to sample people within specific zip codes, or to reach very niche samples. And those are the advantages, but there are, however, disadvantages, and these disadvantages primarily stem from the same source as the advantages, which is the large sample size of these platforms. With such large participant pools, it is inherently more difficult to maintain data quality. The size of these platforms makes it impossible to vet every participant the way that the approved list does on Mechanical Turk. And so to solve this problem, we had worked out an initial feasibility of the what we call pre-survey filters in a 2019 paper with Jesse Chandler. And since then, we have created a solution that can be readily added to any online study on any survey software and on any platform. And we call this system Sentry. Sentry is a pre-survey instrument that works by preventing problematic respondents from ever starting a study. Sentry works by asking participants to respond to a series of short questions, checking their attention, English language comprehension, and honesty. Sentry also performs a number of technical checks, such as checking digital device fingerprints, using an event streamer to look at suspicious mouse movements or translation of survey text, and employs other tools to look for evidence of automated geolocation tracking, and duplicate entries. Together, all of these checks can be performed in about 20 to 30 seconds, and we can make reliable determinations about which participants should be kept out of surveys. Now, when constructing Sentry, we had several methodological goals that we wanted to accomplish. The first goal was scalability, because any effective instrument of this sort should not use the same stimuli over and over again, because problematic respondents will adapt to seeing the same stimuli over time. And the second goal is validation. Stimuli should be validated to measure attentiveness specifically, rather than tapping into cognitive ability or education or linguistic ability, so as not to bias the sample. And to meet these goals, we developed an approach that allows for the creation of a scalable library of tens of thousands of items that can be added to the pre-survey instrument. We did this using a semantic network model approach, where we used models of natural language processing to learn from millions of English language texts and create word associations with different connection weights. And this allowed us to create large libraries of validated word sets that are used as stimuli within Sentry. The difficulty levels of each word set are objectively quantifiable by the use of only high frequency words and calibrated association thresholds. The goals of the semantic network-based word sets are to identify respondents who are inattentive, who speed through surveys, and so they don't even read the questions, or don't speak the study language well enough to understand what they're reading, and so probably shouldn't be in the survey for that reason. On the other hand, these kinds of questions cannot catch participants who are attentive, but who are mischievous, not honest, and whose responses follow an acquiescence bias profile. In other words, who just say yes to everything that they see. To address this problem, we created another library of stimuli that was optimized for detecting participants who are mischievous, who exaggerate their knowledge or abilities, and tend to say yes to most questions. Here's an example of two Sentry items. The first is an associative network model question that asks, what word is most associated with the word collect? The answer in this particular case is gather, and anyone who speaks English at even a very basic level will know that. The second question asks whether the respondent can recall the name of every child of every president in the history of the United States, and you'd be surprised how many people say yes to this kind of question. Together, the Sentry pre-survey instruments consist of between 3 to 6 items, depending on the level of protection that the researchers want to set for their surveys. And overall, Sentry can be used with any online panel provider, and the effectiveness of Sentry has been tested on dozens of different panels and panel aggregators. Here on this slide is a typical example of how we examine the effectiveness of Sentry to identify problematic respondents. We let all respondents pass through Sentry and go on to take a survey, whether they passed or not. And we look at how their data quality compares. These particular data were collected on Lucid, where at least 25% of respondents typically fail Sentry or more. For people who fail Sentry, when asked whether they are a petroleum engineer, which is a very rare profession, much less than 0.1%. For people who fail Sentry, which is on this bottom data points, 50% of people said yes, and 50% of people said no, pretty much, 51 to 49. And this is an indication of random responding. In other words, these people are not reading the questions right, and they're responding randomly. Among people who pass Sentry, however, and pass the most basic level of Sentry, the proportion of people correctly reporting that they're not a petroleum engineer goes from chance now to 96%. And so what these data show overall is that a simple 20-second level 3 pre-survey screen is sufficient to prevent the vast majority of participants from entering the survey on online panels. And using this filter preserves the tremendous capacity for versatile sampling offered by online panels while avoiding data quality problems that are common on these platforms. And so together, the approved group for Mechanical Turk and Sentry for online panels provide social scientists with tools for collecting high quality data from the most commonly used online platforms. And finally, I want to just take this opportunity to also tell you about another important development at CloudResearch. And that is that in addition to the approved list and Sentry, which are tools that we built to improve data quality on existing online platforms, we have an exciting new development to share with you at CloudResearch. And that is that in October, we'll be launching CloudResearch's own participant recruitment platform called Connect. And Connect is built from the ground up with data quality in mind. Connect uses all our vetting processes and technology, including Sentry and their approved list approach, to do everything in our power to make sure that participants in your studies are attentive and engaged. And I really hope that Connect brings together everything that we've learned about data quality over the past 10 years of working with MTurk and hundreds of online panels. And we are very excited for you to try it out. And if anyone is interested in giving Connect a try to see how data quality compares and just general usability of Connect compares to other platforms, you can sign up for an account, and we'll be in touch with you as soon as the platform becomes operational within a few weeks. And so with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope that you'll find the tools that I described in this talk useful for your research projects.
All right. Well, thank you, Labe. We have a couple of minutes here for question and answers before the keynote address of the conference will start at 10:15. So we have just a couple of minutes here. I think there's a few questions in the chat.
Matt, I see Matt was raising his hand. So.
Sorry for confusion. That's the clap icon. I enjoyed the talk. Very nice.
Thank you. I'll take that too. Okay. Let's see. A lot of questions. I'm just going to go from the top here. So one question is, what about Spanish speakers? We seem to have run into problems with feasibility whenever we reach out to panels. So Sentry, I think that's a question about Sentry. Sentry is actually available in about 25 different languages, and Spanish is one of them. And if you have a problem with Spanish speakers, there are actually specific providers that we can recommend who specialize in Spanish-speaking participants. And you will certainly be able to recruit Spanish speakers from those panels. As I said, one of the really important things about the online sample space is there are hundreds of panels, and they all specialize in different things. And cross-cultural and multicultural panels are out there, and they're really very, very, very good. See.
If there are no questions in the chat, actually, I have one quick question.
Sure.
Excellent talk, Labe. Thank you. The question is, the screening, the level 2 screening, are the participants, do they know that they're in the screening process? Like how it works?
Yeah, so participants, they are not told that they're in the screening process. The way it works is with a simple redirect. So when you set up a study on some platform, like on Mechanical Turk, for example, or some other platform, you take a link, right, and it redirects to your, let's say, Qualtrics study. So the way that Sentry works is that it works on a similar link. So you'll take a link, you put it into the platform, and it'll redirect the participant to Sentry. And then once they're done with Sentry, it'll redirect them to the actual survey. And they don't know, so they're not told that they're being screened explicitly. Some people probably realize this, some people don't. But what we found was that it doesn't really matter whether they know or not, because people who are inattentive really aren't paying much attention, so they just end up responding randomly, whether they're in an actual survey or on the pre-screening survey.
That's completely true. From my experience, the problem is that they have their own chats and platforms where they tell other inattentive people to make sure you have to answer, when you participate in this study, make sure to answer this question, whatever, choose C. Don't tell that you're an engineer.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we have a whole library of thousands of items, so nobody ever sees the same thing. No participant ever sees what another participant sees, and that's what helps. Also, people from other countries tend to automatically translate their surveys, and so Sentry automatically catches that as well.